Hi. Hey guys, it's King. Welcome to another Autism Digest interview, where today we have someone who I'm really excited to talk to. As I've said before, at Autism Digest, we're all about all aspects and perspectives on neurodiversity and autism awareness, whether that be the diagnosed, the parent, the medical provider, the nonprofit leader, or the ally. Today we have another ally of the community. You might know her as Sweetie Belle from My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Tiny from Dinosaur Train, which I personally grew up on. She's married to Black Griffin, who's a music YouTuber who also has an impressive neurodiversity initiative. She is Claire Corlett. Thanks for coming on, Claire.
Hi, thank you, Caden. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I think a lot of people might recognize your voice. Specifically, you've raised a lot of my generation, well, if not from MLP, from Dinosaur Train. But for those that may not know you, do you mind telling us your story in your own words?
Sure. Well, hi, my name is Claire. I started doing voiceover from a pretty young age. I think I was like 4, maybe at the earliest. I moved into some on-screen acting as well, and now I'm writing and producing, working in the podcast world a little bit more, doing some live theater here and there, a little bit of everything. Yeah, I've been doing voice acting, still am, for a long time now, and I'm really, really happy to be here. That's my career summary. I guess maybe it's also important to note that I am Canadian and American, citizen of both. I grew up in Canada, and now I'm living in America. So.
That's definitely an impressive story. My next question for you is, have you had any personal experiences interacting with the autism community within your life, whether that be through your husband's neurodiversity initiatives or at fan conventions for MLP specifically?
My immediate answer is yes. I guess it's a little bit hard to define exactly who or where, because most of the time people don't. Some people do tell me, that they have autism, but other people, I can sense that that's there, but I also don't want to necessarily put that on anybody. Although I do feel like I have a pretty good gauge of spectrum neurodiversity. I am on that spectrum as well. Obviously, my husband he was diagnosed with what was known as Asperger's back in the day. So I've met a lot of people who have autism, a lot of people who enjoy my work space and stuff that I've done or stuff that I've worked on. Excuse me. Yeah, I've had a lot of interactions at conventions, as you mentioned, with people with autism, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. Met a lot of interesting folks.
That's definitely amazing. And I really like what you said, how you can sense that, but you don't like putting it on people. I highly respect that. I'm on spectrum myself, and people can instantly tell. As you know, I have certain speech patterns and mannerisms that may not be typical to some, but they don't immediately ask about that, nor do I tell them immediately unless I immediately trust them. So I
Right.
really like what you said about
Yeah.
not putting it on people or prying that information from them. I highly
Yeah.
respect that. My next question for you is, there's been a lot of productions featuring neurodiversity-led characters and a lot of controversy surrounding Hollywood's approach to neurodiversity in media. From the perspective of yourself, a voice actor, and someone who's been a part of some of these productions, how do you think Hollywood can improve on spotlighting neurodivergent stories in media?
That is a really, really awesome question, Kaden, and it's very tough to answer because I'm just one person. But I think, just from a personal opinion perspective, that if people are not familiar with autism and they don't do proper research either, or they are much more likely to put their own perspective, especially if they don't have autism, to put their own perspective on what that is or what that looks like or how that comes across in movies or TV shows. I think it's a really, really tricky topic to jump around because if you don't have that personal experience or you're not going to do the research, the proper research to get there, oftentimes we can have a very specific one kind of, using this as an example, one kind of autism that is portrayed on movies and social media and TV shows. And I think that's why, I don't, jump at just because somebody has one thing that I'm like, oh, that's a pretty autistic trait. Like, I'm not going to assume immediately that they have autism because they could have that one trait and they could have nothing else, or they could not be diagnosed, or maybe they're not diagnosed yet, or they never will be. Like, that is all, very personal decisions that people make. But I think the problem with some movies and TV shows in their productions is a lot of the time they're focusing on checking a box rather than what I believe most movies and TV shows that succeed and do really, really well, they thrive when it is based off of a creative idea. That's really what makes movies good. That's what makes characters and storylines really good and enjoyable. And I think a lot of people, higher up Hollywood people who are much more business focused and tend to put more emphasis on that part, they lose the creativity. And so in that, you don't have you have projects that come out where someone's an autistic character, as an example, and then you watch it and you're kind of like, this is not that good. And some people can point their finger on why that is. And I end up finding out most of the time, or figuring out myself most of the time, that it's normally because they've tried to make it a big branding thing of, this movie has autism in it, instead of just, this is a movie about a guy who's doing this and trying to find out, who he wants to be, or like something something with a little bit more of a personal touch and a real story behind it. So it's a very confusing way of saying that I think creativity is lost a lot of the time. And I think if you have creativity, and you're, it's not just about pushing a narrative, it's much more about, here's a story about blah, 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 blah. And I think that's always the way to go.
I really like that answer. The last interview I had was with Lauren Hoskins, and he said something similar, and I added a bit as to his answer. I'm going to add this to yours. It's also about having empathy. Back in the day, neurodiversity wasn't even a topic besides the movie Rain Man, if you've heard of that. It was touched on a bit, but it was more so to what people thought of autism back then, what people thought of neurodiversity back then. They were trying to portray that to make money, to fund future projects or whatever, when they didn't have any personal experiences with autism back then, as far as we know. Nowadays, the beautiful thing is, a lot of people are starting to have more empathy towards neurodiversity, autistic individuals, and trying to spotlight stories. But like you said, but all they're focused on is checking a box and hoping for the best, when really basically making news stories,
Yeah.
and spotlighting those characters in a creative way, as opposed to judging people by standards and checking a box for money. So I really like that answer. My next question for you is, My Little Pony has had a cult following within the autism community, with some viewers coming up with theories as to which characters themselves might be on the spectrum, specifically Fluttershy and Twilight Sparkle. Why do you think this show is appealing to the autism community?
Obviously, everybody will probably have their own different answer, but I really think that the reason why autistic people have gravitated towards this show is because, in its nature, it is a very pure and sweet and inherently trusting group of people who are just trying to get along and trying to figure out the best way to do things, to tackle issues. It deals with a lot of personal and interpersonal relationships with friends. And I think that, you know, a lot of autistic people um, don't, they feel like they don't have this blueprint for life that everybody else seems to have. It's like, oh, you don't actually, when people say that, they don't actually mean that. They're just saying like, oh, hey, how are you, or whatever. And that really confuses a lot of autistic people that I personally know. And they're like, then why would you say that? Why, things are very much more black and white. And I appreciate that way of thinking, because it makes you question how we even got there to begin with. For just a random example, the colloquialism, how are you? How are you doesn't immediately mean I'm going to answer with, everything that's been going on in my life. And I will tell you how I am through these, this list of things. And I think people really like My Little Pony has cultivated in its earlier days a cult following, because its community was very much based off of not going with the stereotype. Like, I think also the fact that the show was clearly made for younger people, especially gravitating more towards girls, that a lot of young guys who liked it, and I think that the autism definitely played into that, where they're like, this is a very pure show. It's kind, it's sweet, it has these like little valuable lessons and stuff, and it talks about friendships and how to interact with people and all that kind of stuff. I think that it, for people who are very trusting, as the autistic community can definitely be, they liked finding people who also went outside of the norm and went outside of the box of things that you're supposed to like if you're this, that, and the other thing. And here's a show that was, made for a demographic maybe outside of that range. And so people thought, oh, this is fun. This is like a fun way to like communicate with people. And watching the show itself, like it's got it's very wholesome, and I think that people who are wholesome gravitated towards it, especially in the early days. I think that was a huge reason of why that became popular for the autistic community.
I really like that answer, and I absolutely agree with that logic. I still watch some clips of MOP sometimes, and I can absolutely relate to that value of trying to make things work no matter someone's background. So I really like
Yeah.
that answer. My next question for you is, what's your advice to anyone, neurodivergent or not, that wants to make it in voice acting?
Ooh, good question. Well, my general answer to this is, if voice acting aside, if you want to do something in the creative arts world, or want to get into the industry, it's not going to be easy. And the reason I start there is because a lot of people have an idea about what it's going to be or how it's going to look. And the thing is, you could give your own personal story, but the odds of that repeating are still very low. Like, even if somebody, is noticed and was taken by a management company, and the management company pushed for them and they became this huge celebrity, like, that's not necessarily going to happen to you. And that I think specifically, if I'm answering for somebody who is autistic, who likes to have answers, and with that black and white kind of way of thinking, it's very hard for me to explain that, because nothing is really guaranteed. And that's the scary part of it. It's like, you could go to school, you could do all the right, go down all the right learning paths, you could have a coach. That doesn't necessarily guarantee success in that area. But the important thing is, if you really, really want to do something like that, like voice acting, you have to be so dedicated and ready for anything that could happen, you have to be okay with the unknown. You have to be okay with knowing that things are not going to match your expectations. Even if your expectations are like, I wouldn't even say are like grandeur or are not, they could be very simple expectations. For example, going to school and knowing once you graduate, it'll be about 3 to 4 months before you get a job. That's also not guaranteed. So even something like that, that seems like it would make sense in the grand scheme of things, people can help you out. People can tell you, here's the ballpark, but the ballpark also changes all the time. So if you're okay with not knowing when that job is going to hit or when the next one's going to happen, or if it's going to be, a character that maybe you wouldn't even cast yourself at, like there's so many unknowns. So if you're okay and can understand that unknown will continue for pretty much your whole life or your whole career span, then go for it.
That's a very amazing answer, not just with entertainment, but with anything really. Especially like how you brought up getting a job after college or high school. I can definitely relate to that. I'm about to be a senior this year in college, and I've been trying to find a job for a while now for after graduation. But I really like what you said about being okay with not having a direct answer yet. That's a very amazing answer. My last question for you is, what does the future hold for you? I heard that they were working on a live action My Little Pony movie.
I heard that too.
So, do you know if you're going to be a part of that, as far as you know?
As far as I know, no. I will not be a part of that. I did recently hear about that, though. I'm very curious to see how that will play out. And again, I go back to my first answer, which is if your intentions are creative and good in and wholesome in that way, I think it should be really great. But if they're going towards checking a box, whether that's selling merchandise or trying to extrapolate off of something that has made people money in the past, fingers crossed. But no, I'm not involved in it in any way. But it should be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
I absolutely agree. Anyways, that's going to do it for this interview. Thank you so much to Claire for coming on and sharing her story and her extremely powerful advice. If you guys want to see more amazing interviews, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Autism Digest channel. Stay tuned for our August issue that comes out next month. You can find that by going to autismdigest.com, and stay tuned for the audio file of this interview to be posted on Spotify soon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.